I'm Greg Fox. I'm the director of the Program for International Legal Studies, and it's a real pleasure to welcome 4 of our distinguished alumni back to Wayne Law School in a room that I'm not sure was here when you were here. That's, I think it was intentional. For a discussion about their work, their careers, and how you can hopefully be like them, because I can assure you each of them has an absolutely fascinating practice that deals with a whole variety of international legal issues. So I'm going to give very brief introductions because each of our panelists will be talking about their own career paths and their current jobs in much more detail than I could certainly do justice, and so we'll leave that to them. Each of them will describe their background. I'll then ask a couple of questions, and we can have some discussion, and then open it up to questions from all of you. And we'll try and do all that by 1:20 because I think there is a class coming into this room, so we'll need to vacate. So by 1:20 you will have a roadmap in your head for how you can become an international lawyer. Again, very briefly, on my far left is Joe DeVito, who is with Howard & Howard in Royal Oak, his practice concentrates on business and financial transactions and real estate matters. To Joe's right is Kim Berger, who is a partner in the litigation and dispute resolution and intellectual property groups at Miller Canfield in Detroit. To my right is Brad Bidwell, who is the lead global data security and data privacy attorney for the Dow Chemical Company. And you're at Dow headquarters. And then finally, on my far right, Bryan Zair, who came all the way from Chicago, where he is a partner in the corporate and securities practice group of Mayer Brown, his practice focuses on representing publicly traded and privately held U.S. and foreign corporations. So we'll just go from my left to my right. You can speak from here, speak from your seat, whatever you'd like. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Professor Fox. Well, good day to everyone. Thanks for having me. It's been a long time, and as Professor Fox said when I was here, this wasn't here. It was very Spartan-esque right here at Wayne Law School, so it's good to see that the university looks as good as it does. So I started at James Madison College. I was in international relations major there, and then from there came right to Wayne. And while at Wayne, took public international law and international business transactions at the time, and then worked with Professor Moak that was here, a Michigan international lawyer, and then actually did the overseas study at The Hague through Wayne State. So I felt really prepared when I left Wayne to enter a career of law, but focused on international transactions. Now the question is then when you get out of Wayne, where do you land and how do you start practicing international law, and what is international law? It's different to different people. I think we'll get into that later, but I was fortunate to be hired by Dinsmore and Scholl in Cincinnati, and so I started to practice there, and under a partner named Harvey Cohen, who did international law. So I was very fortunate to start to do international transactions for companies like Procter & Gamble and other GE Aircraft and other companies that Harvey worked for. From there, I returned back to Detroit and worked for Butzel Long. And Butzel Long did a lot of international clients through the automotive industry, and was a firm partner of Lex Mundi, which is an affiliation of law firms around the world, and I think most firms have those affiliations now. From there, I was recruited into ThyssenKrupp, which is a large German company, to do mergers and acquisitions for them in North America. And during that stay, it's where I met Bryan, and we worked on a couple of deals together. And that gave me a lot of exposure to international travel and doing mergers and acquisitions around the world. And then from there, Howard & Howard was looking for someone to run their M&A practice. So I landed back at Howard & Howard, and now I do work for ThyssenKrupp and for other international clients on the M&A front. So that's my background.
Good afternoon. It's great to see you here. at Wayne, I didn't take any classes even remotely related to what I do now. So that's good. You guys are already a step ahead of the game. You're actually thinking about what you might want to do and kind of taking classes to get you in a good position to find that kind of career path for you. But I left out of Wayne. I went to work in a litigation department. I wanted to do litigation. And so I just practiced general litigation for about 2 years. Then I left there and was hired at Miller Canfield into their commercial litigation group. And just in general, at Miller Canfield, and I suspect it's true at most large law firms, the litigation group is huge, and it's a lot of attorneys that do a lot of different things. So a couple of the partners that I started working for did trademark work, trademark protection, trademark infringement, and other kind of IP related work. So I really started off doing IP litigation, and from there, you know, just due to the kind of clients that we worked for, ended up doing a lot of trademark prosecution with the USPTO, which is really just a fancy way of saying you're filing companies' trademarks and trying to get them through to registration. So I started off doing a lot of U.S. trademark prosecution work, and from there ended up with a lot of, in particular, automotive, but for me as well, I have a lot of technology clients, software clients who are global and sell their products globally. And so it went from there to really an international trademark practice, where I was assisting them in managing and protecting their trademarks and other IP assets globally. So I was one of the first people at the firm actually to do the international protection. You know, it's become a bigger thing in recent years. You know, probably 20 years ago, international trademark protection was not that hot of a topic, and it was not something that a lot of companies sought to do. So there weren't a lot of people at the firm that did it. So to be quite honest, I just went to a lot of conferences, read up, figured it out, and you know, by virtue of just practicing and assisting my clients in their global protection of their trademarks, kind of became an expert at it, which was, you know, which is always a good position to have if you're in kind of a niche practice like I am. So that's what I do. I do a lot of international trademark protection as well as domestic. I still do litigation, IP-related litigation, trademarks and copyright infringement and things of that nature, and a lot of counseling to clients on protecting those IP assets.
So I'm Brad. I graduated in 2011, and my career path actually follows Kim's pretty closely. Although in law school I did know what I wanted to focus on, which was intellectual property. So I took all the IP classes that I could, took cyber law classes, that kind of stuff. And I was lucky enough to get hired into an IP boutique firm right out of law school. I actually worked there during law school as well. And I started immediately with international trademark work. So I managed a portfolio of roughly 600-700 trademarks worldwide for one of the firm's clients. I did that for a couple of years, and then this past January, so January of 2014, I took a job at Dow Chemical, focusing on data security and data privacy. So that's been my path into the international field. I've always had an interest in international issues and technology and the law, and I studied abroad in undergrad, which probably helped with getting the international work immediately, because I already had that international experience. But I'm sure if you have any questions about what it is that I do as a data privacy, data security attorney, feel free to ask.
Hi, I'm Bryan Zair. I'm a graduate of Wayne Law in 2004, and I graduated from think I always had an interest in international issues, not so much strictly international law. I was a business major in undergrad, had sort of an interest in international markets, things like that. When I went to law school, I sort of looked at what I wanted to do, and I think I wanted to sort of stay toward transactional. So I kind of took my classes in law school, kind of slanted toward corporations, taxation, things like that. I took an international business transactions class as well. And when I graduated law school, I started at Clark Hill in Detroit, and I was in their M&A group, a sort of corporate M&A mix. And I didn't have a ton of international exposure early on, but one of my first experiences with international sort of issues was for an auto-related client in Detroit, Bentley. And it wasn't even a transaction, it was sort of a litigation issue that needed sort of transactional, needed transactional guidance as well. So I worked with a partner that was the head of the corporate group, and I was sort of assisting. And I sort of got to see all of the way international issues kind of really adjust transactions to kind of make you think more on your feet a little bit, and really kind of require a real collaborative effort, because we were working with people, we were working with counsel overseas in Germany, and sort of got the sense that I kind of liked that type of work. As I got progressed a little bit at Clark Hill, I started doing more mergers and acquisitions, and that's when I think Joe mentioned I worked on a couple of transactions when Joe was running the M&A department at ThyssenKrupp. And I think that was probably the most intensive international work I got. Shortly thereafter, I looked for work in Chicago and I left. But that sort of, I kind of realized that I liked that type of work, and I kind of wanted to try to focus more on that. Moved out to Chicago and joined Mayor Brown in end of 2007, December of 2007. And I did kind of have in my mind that I knew I wanted to do M&A, and I kind of wanted to try to get more involved in the international aspects. And I just sort of kept my eyes open for opportunities. I started working on a couple of joint ventures that were cross-border. One of my earliest deals was a joint venture in Latin America. And sometimes you do that, and I think Kim, similarly, you kind of work on that and you become known as the person that knows this. So all of a sudden, I don't speak Spanish or Portuguese or anything, but I'm the Brazilian joint venture person. And it's been good, and it's really interesting, and I've through that had an opportunity to work through a lot of transactions and other issues across the world. And I found that if you're going to do international law, one of the things you have to get used to is the fact that the hours are different. And if you need to talk to China, you're either going to be waking up very early or staying up very late. And some people don't like that, and that's one aspect of the work. But I find that it always, sort of the collaborative nature of the work, and also just the interesting issues that you're always kind of sort of trying to figure out and make work kind of has kept me interested in it. And that's all I got.
Thanks, everyone. Well, let me ask a couple of questions, and we can just go in the same order, and if people would like to chime in and add something, that's absolutely fine. These are questions that I think might be on the minds of the students here. The first is, can you mention some kind of interesting new areas of law that have emerged in your practice that might serve as guidance for students who are thinking about course selection or thinking about law review note topics, or really just areas to bone up on? It seems like kind of boning up on your own can get you somewhere. Joe, maybe if you could start.
So, it's funny because, again, we talk about international law. Is it public international law, is it private international law, and where do they intersect? I think in the M&A field, what we run into is we run into both the public international law, which would be the regulatory aspects of doing business internationally, and then we run into the commercial aspects of it, and then you have the local law. So as a U.S. lawyer, do you need to know the local laws in the European Union in order to conclude a transaction in the U.S.? And the answer is yes. Sometimes you do. You rely on local counsel. So I think it's important actually to be able to spot the issues. And so in order to do that, regulation, conflict minerals type laws would be one on the public front, that you would want to understand that and understand that the overlap in regulation of businesses. Another one would be, anti-bribery type regime across the world, right? So, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in the U.S., but then the foreign equivalent to that act throughout the world as well.
For me, I think as Joe indicated, practicing international law doesn't mean that I know the trademark laws of every country on the planet, because no one could possibly know that. I rely a lot on my local counsel to explain the differences between the U.S. trademark law and the trademark law of their country, particularly when issues crop up for clients of mine. But one of the things that there is a so-called international trademark registration where there are various countries in the world that are members of the Madrid Agreement or Madrid Protocol, and what that enables a client to do is to be able to file one trademark registration and designate what countries they want it applied to, as long as those countries are members of the protocol or the agreement. So the interesting thing to me that continues to crop up is that certain countries decide to join finally, and they've got to kind of revamp their system to become members of Madrid so that people can file a Madrid application and designate their country, as opposed to going, the other route you have to go is to go in country by country and file your trademark registration, which can be very expensive, particularly for large international corporations that have a ton of trademarks that they need to protect. So keeping up with who's becoming members, who's joining Madrid, also who's tightening their trademark and other IP laws. China has always been a big problem for everyone, for all kinds of IP. But they are taking steps now and passing additional laws to try to tighten that protection. So I think kind of keeping up on what some of the big players in the world of IP protection, what they're doing, is what I try to do anyway.
Data privacy is probably one of the hottest areas of law in my humble opinion right now. Anytime you open a newspaper, turn on the TV, or really anything, you hear about a new hack or about some privacy issue that Facebook has had or that some other social network or app has had. So really staying abreast of what the developments are in that area of law, FTC enforcement, SEC enforcement, FCC enforcement, figuring out who is actually doing what and who can do what. All of the authority is being challenged right now on various enforcement mechanisms from all those agencies. And that's just in the U.S. So internationally, data privacy laws are changing every day. There's currently a debate going on in Russia with regard to data localization, which means that all data regarding Russian citizens has to be stored on servers in Russia. So the question on everyone in the business world's mind is, what the heck does this mean for us? So the easiest way to stay on top of those things, first you do a lot of reading. I read a ton of articles every single day to try to figure out what the heck is going on in far thrown off reaches of the world. But there's also, just like with trademarks, there's the International Trademark Association, INPA. For privacy professionals, there's the IAPP, International Association of Privacy Professionals. They have student memberships, so you can actually join as a student for a much discounted rate. You can attend conferences, you can network with other privacy professionals. If you're interested in technology, its intersection with the law, developing issues, developing areas of law, data privacy really, in my opinion, is probably one of the hottest areas, like I said. So that would be my recommendation, is look at joining IAPP, look at possibly attending a conference, network with people there, and if it's interesting to you,
specialist areas, having a knowledge in that area because it's a newer area, or at least a more topical area that people aren't as experienced in going way back. It's sort of an evolving area and there are opportunities there. So I would suggest some of the areas to think about if you're interested in international law are areas that are sort of evolving today so that you're not competing with somebody that has 25 years of experience in an area. So if you're thinking about writing law review articles, for instance, I can tell you when certain new issues come to mind, usually the first thing I do is Google it to see if I can find some good articles. So whether that's a law review article or just an article in a journal. A couple of the areas that come to mind, I can't tell you I have any experience in them, but I know that there are areas that as they come up we're going to have to deal with. One is my firm's pulling together a sort of a task force on how companies can do business with Cuba. Now, what's changed with the recent legislation and sort of, that's an area where really nobody knows what's going on. We can read what the law says or we can try to interpret it, but it's an evolving area. And I can guarantee you that if you take the time to do research and kind of thoroughly put together something, people will read it and that could very easily lead to further discussions, maybe invitations to be on panels, and next thing you know, you're the expert. Another area that's sort of evolving, this is a more settled area of law, but because sort of different countries are following the U.S. model, antitrust laws. I've been dealing with a lot of countries that are sort of developing their corporate practice, are developing new antitrust laws. I think China is one of the new ones. Brazil has a new set of laws. India. So these areas, again, these are areas where not everyone is fully versed in these things. Usually, you're going to be dealing with local counsel, but at the same time, putting something together that gives people an overview or lets people know that you have an interest and an understanding in the area, I think will get you opportunities eventually.
Great. The next question I wanted to ask was for some advice for students about what you all can do to get to where these folks are. Just talking with them earlier, and this is just my general experience, there's not always a clear and defined path from law school to international practice. In fact, a lot of people will tell you, and maybe our panelists will tell you, that they kind of fell into it by accident. Let me just take the chair's prerogative and tell you a quick story about a friend of mine who teaches international law at the University of Indiana. And after law school, he started his career in his hometown, which was Kansas City, just being a general transactional lawyer. And he had a client come into his office who wanted to distribute products, I'm not sure what product it was, in the Palestinian territories. And he said, how do I do this? Are there, what law applies there? I don't really understand. I know where to go when I distribute something in Germany, but Palestine, I don't know. So my friend started doing some research, and this was in the early 1990s, right after the Oslo Accords, which was this kind of then hopefully optimistic agreement to move the peace process forward. And one part of the Oslo Accords created an Office for Economic Development in the Palestinian territories, which was headquartered in Washington. So my friend called up this office and said, can you tell me something about what laws apply? Because my research shows that it's this incredible hodgepodge of Jordanian law and old British law and Ottoman law and Israeli law, and I don't understand it. And they said, well, we're just getting started. We don't understand it either, but send us whatever you write up, redacted appropriately, and we'd be really interested. So my friend, gave his client some advice, sent this off. He then gets a call from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee saying, we're about to hold hearings on investment in the Palestinian territories, and we hear you're an expert on the law that applies there. Would you come and testify? And I said, okay, sure. And so he went and testified, then went back to his law firm. About a month later, he gets a call from the Palestinian Authority, and they say, we hear you're the expert on the law applicable to foreign investment. We're about to draft a new foreign investment law for the territories. Would you be the lead draftsman? And so he ended up doing that, and unfortunately, I think politics intervened after that. But he did not plan to be the world's expert on investment in the Palestinian authorities when he was in law school or even in his practice. So I suspect some version of that kind of backing into a really, really interesting opportunity might show up in some of our panelists' advice. But sorry for that diversion. Please go ahead. What can you tell our students about how they can prepare?
So, as Kim and I were saying, I think earlier, Professor Fox, sometimes you're lucky to get into it if you want to get into it. But luck is defined as preparation meets opportunity, right? So what you need to do is you need to prepare yourself for a career in international law. If you have the opportunity to travel internationally, you should do that. If you have a foreign language skill, that's great. The people that practice international law are the ones that have clients that are doing business internationally, right? So if you prepare yourself to be a business attorney, whether it's an intellectual property attorney, whether it's an M&A attorney, whether it's an employee benefits attorney, there will be opportunities that will arise that will take you beyond the borders of the U.S. So just from my own experience, I took the business planning course here, as Bryan did. I took international business transactions. I took public international law. And again, I did the overseas study. I helped Professor Moak with the Michigan International Lawyer magazine. So you prepare yourself to be ready for an international career and prepare yourself to represent business clients. And then look for firms. When you're being interviewed by firms, I suggest that you interview the firms back and ask those firms about their clients and what their clients are doing, and if they are doing international deals with their clients. And if they're doing it, there's a good chance, and they're a busy firm, that you're going to get thrown into the fire almost immediately, right? So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with what Joe said, particularly about when you're looking for a job. Look at, it's probably going to be larger firms because they tend to have the larger international clients. But look for positions with them, or even in-house. Because Joe you had some great in-house international experience, so that's an option too. But yeah, I mean, if look to those firms that are actually doing international work, because that, to be quite honest, is what a lot of times I think as young attorneys, you end up doing the work of your partners, the partners of the firm. So if the partners are doing international work, you'll end up doing international work. And I agree with the study abroad programs, like anything that you can get to kind of distinguish yourself and give you maybe a little leg up on other people, I think is great. I know we were talking, you mentioned INTA earlier, so I'm a member of the International Trademark Association, and I'm sure for all, there's an organization pretty much for everything. But if there's an area you're particularly interested in, for example, you can be a student member at INTA. It's like $25 a year. It's so cheap compared to what I pay. And you get to go to the conferences. You can go to the educational seminars. You can be on the academic committee and actually interact with other trademark professionals and kind of be the liaison between your law school and the organization. So you can really get a lot of good experience and meet a lot of people that you might end up networking with. INTA also has a job bank. So you need a membership to access all of this stuff, and there's volunteer opportunities. So I think getting involved with those kinds of organizations as a student, if you already know what you want to do, can be invaluable in terms of the connections you make and just the knowledge that you gain from your involvement with them.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I appreciate the fact that as a student, it's really hard to focus on doing well in your classes and doing all this other stuff. But your career really begins now, while you're in your classes. You set yourself up for your career while you're in law school. So you should focus on the classes that are in the areas that you want to practice in, so you have that expertise coming out of law school. The knowledge is one thing, practical application is another, so that's what you get when you're actually in the firm. But having that base of knowledge to draw from is great. If you're interested in technology, focus on in tech law classes, focus on IP, focus on telco law. There's going to be significant amount of litigation coming out. If think about what's going on in the world, really, and what you can focus on while in law school to position yourself to deal with those issues when you come out.
Yeah, no, I agree with what everyone said, all very good advice, and I guess I'll build on it a little further. You're always going to, you may not, coming out of law school, you may not have the opportunity right away to work in exactly the area of law that you want to, but you sort of have to say, you know, you're, like you said, you're kind of responsible for your career right now. And so when you're in law school, actually some of the best opportunities to work with professors that specialize in areas of law that you might not be able to see in an everyday practice, you should take advantage of that if that's something you're interested in. Help with papers, help with classes, whatever you can do to kind of get your, you know, get an imprint. You have something on your resume. You have something now that says, I've done this, I've studied this, and I have some experience. One of the most important things you can do is just constantly be on the lookout for opportunities. And this sort of ties into me, I'll get there. But so everyone on this panel, somehow, I think we all have some connection. I worked with Joe when I was at Clark Hill. I worked with Kim's husband when I was at Clark Hill. I worked for Dow at Mayor Brown. Brad's at Dow. When I was looking for an opportunity to move to Chicago, somebody I know that was in-house had a good relationship with a couple of people, and he put me in touch with them. That didn't ultimately lead to a job, but that led me to another opportunity that ultimately led me a chance to interview and get a job in a place that I wanted to get, and sort of and maybe did a little more of the type of work that I wanted to get. So, you know, really just kind of keep your eyes open and always think about, you know, follow the golden rule, you treat people right, and hope that, you know, what goes around comes around. And the other thing is, you know, always, you know, if something comes up, it's almost always, if an opportunity comes up, it's almost always not the right time, unfortunately. I had just lateraled over to my firm. I lateraled over in December of '07. I had to take the Illinois bar because I lived in Detroit for 3 years, and I couldn't waive in to the Illinois bar. So I was taking the Illinois bar in, I think it's February, and as soon as I got there, I had an opportunity to work on a Brazilian joint venture. Probably the worst time. I wanted to take Barbary, all this, and the partner that offered me the opportunity said, look, I'm literally flying out in 2 days, and I'm probably not going to leave Sao Paulo for 2 weeks, but you told me you were interested in this stuff, here's a chance. So didn't go to Barbary for a little while, got to do the work there, and you know, when I came back, it was very difficult, it was a little stressful, it was challenging, but when I came back, you know, you talked about backing into it, you know, we do, usually in firms, they'll have like a little announcement when a deal gets done internally for their own benefit of the other practitioners. They sent around an email. I was associated with that. The next thing something came up internationally, especially in Latin America, I got a call, and that's sort of how it went. So sometimes it's just luck, but it's also, I think as Joe said, you know, preparation as well as opportunity, and get a chance to take it.
Piggybacking on what he said, in addition to working with professors, do your best to impress your professors. Always be on, because professors do get contacted from law firms for recommendations, or we have a position open, do you know someone that you think would fit well? So always, it should be common sense, but always do your best. Always be ready. And like I said, it's difficult with prepping, studying, all this other stuff you gotta do, but if you want that opportunity, that's what you have to do.
Anything else?
One thing I would add is we haven't mentioned a career in a public organization. So I mean, I think the International Trade Administration, Department of Commerce, you know, any of those type of agencies that touch international regulation and the flow of international commerce. We get involved in transactions where our clients export around the world, and then as a part of their due diligence, we have to ensure that we'll represent and warrant that our clients have all the appropriate export licenses and exporting of technology, and whether there's been any inadvertent unlicensed exporting of technology, which can be deemed to have happened if someone here on a visa gets information from the company that's regulated information. So immigration law is another very important aspect of international law, very important. So there are different avenues to wind up eventually at the same spot.
Yeah, NGOs or international organizations are a great opportunity. It may be easier to find those opportunities or go directly to those opportunities than to go to a firm and kind of back into the area. And frankly, after you've been at one of those NGOs or one of those international organizations, it's easier, I would say, to jump from there to a counsel role at a law firm or in-house counsel because you've got that experience. So you already are a regulator. You know what's going on. You know how they work, and that gives you a great ability when you go in-house or inside a law firm to actually influence and know how they're going to react to whatever the issue is that's going on.
Right, exactly. We just closed a deal with a Chinese investor, and it involved the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. And we hired local counsel in D.C. that had experience directly on the committee for one of the department heads in the U.S. government. So you can do public service for any number of years and then come back out into private practice and be extremely successful. I mean, there are some waiting periods and other things, just that in terms of going right into private practice, but that's a good avenue too. You'll have that expertise and you'll be sharper than anyone in any private firm.
Speaking about federal regulatory agencies raises another question in my mind. We're obviously a law school in Michigan, but would you suggest that students perhaps look for opportunities in D.C. or in New York or Chicago, other places that have substantial international practice opportunities?
Just real quick, I don't think it's necessary. I mean, we're a Midwest-based law firm, and we do deals all over the world, and we have inbound activity because of the auto industry here in the U.S. So you look at the industries in the location, and you look at what your clients are doing here in the state of Michigan. So I don't think it's necessary. I mean, certainly can go other places, but this is a large international hub. Just look at our airport and the number of flights coming in from Asia on a daily basis, and that'll tell you how much international trade and law is going on here in Detroit.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. We actually have 3 offices in Poland that we've had since the 80s, and it was all based on one, it started off as one client, a large automotive client that we did work for and that needed our assistance there, and then it just kind of grew from there. And now we have something like 45 attorneys in Poland, which seems so bizarre. I mean, but we do a lot of work there, and I think it's key that we have the automotive industry here because so much of that is global and international, and that so there are all sorts of deals going on, and really, even like I said, some of my technology clients and my software clients are honestly becoming very large international global players. So you certainly can go to those other cities, but I do think there are opportunities here, even with Midwest-based firms, to get that international experience.
Yeah, I would agree. We've got big firms in the area, so just like was mentioned before, interview the firm back when you're getting interviewed and ask if you have international work, what scope of international work do you have. A lot of that stuff, honestly, you can find out ahead of time. So if you walk into the interview and you ask those questions without having done the pre-work, that's not a good thing. Because if it's something that you can find out by yourself, they're going to have expected you to have done the research and know the answers. So you can ask them. Maybe not, do you have international work, but you can ask them about their international work in China or Brazil or whatever area of the world that they specialize in. And there's plenty of firms in this area that have that work. So while you can go to these other places, it's probably easier to do, like you did, start here, and then if you want to work your way to New York or Chicago or somewhere else, go that route. You can apply, but it's easier to get a job in this area, I would say, than outside.
No, I think that's right. I think there are lots of opportunities right where you're at. There are lots of opportunities everywhere, especially the way sort of the economy has evolved and the world is so interconnected now. You can be in the middle of Iowa and doing deals in China, for doing, having litigation, protecting patents, doing all types of work everywhere. I guess go a little towards what Professor Fox was saying, maybe if there is a specific area that maybe you have interest in, and there's an organization or there's an agency in DC that you have an opportunity to go work for a couple of years and get that experience, I'd say go for it. I mean, that's like getting your LL.M and your MBA all at once, and it makes you very marketable. You're going to be at the forefront of the developments in the law. You'll probably be, in some cases, making them, and that makes you invaluable, and that's sort of something you take with you as you go. So it doesn't have to necessarily be moved to a firm or even a permanent move. If you just, this is an opportunity. If you're interested in tax law, you have to do a lot in DC. If you're, if you're interested in securities law, you can go to the SEC. You'll be at the forefront. And I think it's the same thing with international taxation issues, international trade issues, things like that, where if you get an opportunity in New York or DC, it's something you should consider.
Great, well, thank you very much. Well, let's open it up to questions. If you have a question for a particular panelist, please say who that person is, or if the question's just for everyone, that's fine too. Yes?
Hi, so for example, is doing a master's in law, LL.M, does that, so if I specialize in, say, intellectual property or data privacy in my master's degree, does that also take into account in the future?
Yeah, and I'm new, I don't have an LL.M. I don't know if anyone on the panel does have an LL.M. So I'll let you speak to it, but I think it does. I think it helps. It shows your interest in that area and your specialization in that area. But
So I received my LL.M. here while I was a partner at Botzel Long. I was working, I was going to school at night here, and so I have a master's in corporate securities finance LL.M. program. I don't know what they call it. That was a while ago. But I think it helps, and I mean, I think my philosophy is, and this is what I impress upon the young attorneys in our firm, is that you need to be the best you can be in your field, and that's the best way to get clients, because many people can be a good marketer and bring clients in the door, but you can lose them as fast as you bring them in. So you have to stay on the top of your game and be cutting edge in your area. So I think an LL.M. for me, it has paid off. Especially when I'm here at Wayne.
We got the memo. Oh, sorry, yes.
For also the data privacy law and stuff like that, how difficult is it to get into that if you don't have the tech background?
It's not really all that difficult because the data privacy laws themselves are tech agnostic, so it doesn't matter what they necessarily are relating to. The data security piece, so cybersecurity, it requires more technical knowledge. But data privacy, really, you don't have to have much technology at all. I'm a huge nerd, so I have it, which helps. But the data privacy doesn't require it.
Yes.
So do you think that it's seen as a good thing to get some knowledge about foreign legal systems, or is it best to rely on the local counsel?
It probably depends a little bit on the situation. There's certain areas in the world that you might have clients that are, have issues in more often. I have a client right now that has a lot of issues in Brazil. So just by virtue of the fact that we've been dealing with so many, it's the worst. No, I'll say that off the record. No, but it is. So I've learned a lot about Brazil law, the Brazil practice in terms of, we have ongoing litigation down there right now. We have issues with the Brazilian Patent and Trademark Office. So just by virtue of having a client that has had so many issues down there for so many years, I am now knowledgeable about Brazilian trademark law in ways I never thought I would be. But, my answer would be it kind of depends. It depends on, again, so much of it is client dependent, I think. It depends on, how much time you're spending working on issues in that jurisdiction, or how many clients you might have that, like I mentioned, China is, I think, big for everyone in almost every industry. so having a little bit of knowledge about their practices can be helpful. But I guess, I know this is not very helpful, my answer is just kind of it depends.
Yeah, no, I think
on
that's
the
right.
issue.
I think that's right. I don't think coming out of law school, and you guys jump in and tell me if I'm wrong, I don't think you're expected to sort of know very well the laws of certain jurisdictions. A lot of it is
Absolutely not.
maybe
Yeah.
just, yeah, right, I agree.
I think the interesting aspect
Yeah.
about it, again, is to be able to spot the issue.
That's
So
the key.
a comparative, a course on comparative international law, international IP law would be one, comparative international business law, comparing, our system of the Uniform Commercial Code to other systems, and understanding the differences and what that means in terms of exporting and importing. Those type of things are very important to know for our clients. If you have, and if you don't have to know the local law cold, but if you know sort of what it is. I mean, as I said here, I have a German business law book, comparative German business law book sitting on my desk back in my office. And so I reference it, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are things that you need to know. And sometimes you want to be able to answer the question generally for the client, but you want to say, but I'm not an expert in that area and we need local counsel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's very critical because the laws change there as much as they change here.
Yeah.
And it's as hard it is to keep abreast of the IP laws in the US, they're ever changing overseas as well.
Yeah, and for international law in general, I would say if you're gonna be doing things where you're working with people in foreign jurisdictions, whether it's local counsel or also, whether it's authorities, you really kind of have to, one thing that I think is very helpful for people, and I've seen it work to people's benefit, and as you've heard them, is sort of really think about the soft skills, the cultural differences that you come across. And to me, that's sort of what makes me interested in doing international law, is that, when you do a deal in Brazil, for instance, or you do something in Brazil, they have this different concept of just the way the legal process works. The aspect of, we in the US, I'm just talking from an M&A perspective, but it can probably apply to anything, we tend to write way too many words. We just overpaper everything. And they'll have things where you really have to be able to think about how you can apply and draw analogies. I think that helps, sort of to understand, because you're not always, even if you're using local counsel, they have a different approach, they have a different legal system, and you have to be able to kind of translate. And a lot of times that's your job, is to think about the issues, maybe think about when you ask a question and you get an answer, what didn't they tell you? What's missing there?
Right,
And
some of the framework, they call them framework agreements that you see will actually reference, that this area will be handled by, German code, commercial code section 518. And that's all the section will say.
Quiet.
And it doesn't have an introductory title on the paragraph. So you have no idea what section 518 of the German business code says, right? So you have to, we write it out, right? So as US lawyers, we're trained to spill it all out on the paper, which is sometimes good, sometimes bad. I'm dealing with a situation right now where we have an international joint venture that's a subsidiary of a company we're selling, and there's a framework agreement with a French entity, and it's 2 pages long, and no one understands what it means. Not even the people who wrote it. So it was put in a drawer and hasn't been looked at in 10 years, so I think sometimes I would argue for the US side, where we say what it means a little
Yeah.
more. So.
Yeah, I would echo everyone. I mean, you should have a working knowledge of your client's jurisdictions, and you should be able to realize when you can give a pretty general answer, or when you need specific guidance. And you should not be afraid to say, I need to ask local counsel to get you an exact question, or an exact answer to that question. But here's what I think, based on my knowledge of the law, or my knowledge of the general law worldwide. That shouldn't be your answer to everything they ask you, but that answer is completely acceptable.
And I definitely agree with the comparative, being able to compare the US jurisdiction to other jurisdictions around the
Yep.
world. I think that's almost what clients are looking for most. And then, you
Helps them
can.
understand.
It does, it helps them, they don't really always, I have right now a client in Pakistan, and they don't understand, why does it take 5 days for them to get back to you? Well, because it's not the US, and they have different standards, and they just do things in a different, they're not, it's not as immediate. Everything in the US is very immediate.
Yeah.
It is
Very
not
efficient.
immediate in other all other parts of the world.
No.
So, a lot of times you just have to be able to kind of have a big picture view and be able to explain that to the client so that they're satisfied and they don't think it's you at the end of the day. You know, and that's one of the
Managing
issues I've had in Brazil. Yeah, it's a lot of managing expectations and explaining how the two systems are different, and then really relying on local counsel for the specifics.
Yeah, and I think the inverse of that holds true as well. So I act as, U.S. secretary for a lot of international companies here in the U.S., and I deal with general counsels that sit in Europe or other places, and they'll ask, well, how do you do it in the U.S.? And the knowledge of how their system works and to be able to compare it and say, well, I know in France it works this way, but in the U.S. the employment laws are completely different, and the ERISA laws and whether someone has a pension or doesn't have a pension is completely different. And so having that base knowledge of their laws, their legal system, and then applying it when you explain how things work here is also very helpful.
And then a lot of that is gained through experience, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
That's not
I
something you
didn't
need to
come out of
come
law
out
school
with.
knowing this, but you
Yeah.
go through it once, you do a deal in France. I always take it back to deals because I do M&A, but you find out all these issues with works councils, and they have really, really tough laws that you probably remember. So then now next time you're doing a deal in France, first thing you say is, I'm going to need local counsel. We're going to have works councils issues if you have employees. And you just kind of every time you do something you come across. I think I came across a deal. This one blew my mind. I can't remember if it was Germany, but there was a contract before it could be signed. It had to be read aloud fully before the notary could sign it, and it had to be read aloud before the people that would be signing the agreement, cover to cover. And then they signed. I can't remember where it was. I think for some reason I think it was a civil law type jurisdiction. But I mean that just there's no way you're going to know that. But then the next time you come across a jurisdiction, you say, well, you know what, might have an issue.
Yeah,
I want to get it notarized. Yeah.
Yeah.
So things like that come
And
up.
that one happened to be 185 pages now.
I was wondering if that
It
was
wasn't
the
the
deal we were
two
talking
pages.
about. Haven't forgot it yet, Joe.
Can you have one of those computer programs that scans and reads out loud instead of letting a person?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe that's the forefront of the law. Who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. As a former litigator, as you're talking about differences in areas of law that affect transactions, there's equal sticker shock, I think, when people understand what's involved in litigating in the United States. I mean, the extent of personal jurisdiction, the extent of discovery, punitive damages, those are all things that generally don't exist in civil law countries, and I suspect lots of other places. And I would imagine part of advising foreign clients is either on choice of law clauses or settlements before you get sued in the U.S. might be another kind of instance of intercultural education. Yes.
Yeah, first of all, appreciate your time. Thank you. Mine's kind of piggyback, maybe just to focus the answer a little bit. In terms of, I know, like, when I first came to law school, I'm like, okay, you got all these classes, you got M&A, you got arbitration, you got all these that have kind of domestic, we think of it from a domestic perspective. Just going through our classes, though, is there maybe any advice on giving the should we be thinking about, like, if we go, take an arbitration class, or, should we be thinking, because we're interested in international, what's the aspect, or is it just become an expert in M&A and then, pick up, the international spin? It seems compounding after your answer there just a second ago. I guess it's less compounding, it's less intimidating, but it seems a little intimidating.
I think Joe made a really good point as far as from the corporate transactional side is being able to spot issues. So I found, taking a class 12 years ago at Wayne, you wouldn't expect to retain it. I haven't retained it, but sometimes you come across an issue and you're like, you know what? It's strange how many times you think back to a class and you say, I remember this. You take a corporations class and you think of Revlon duties, and you realize there are issues. And so I think taking classes that have an international flavor to them, there is definitely some benefit to it. I think you have to kind of focus. You should also keep in mind like the types of stuff you want to do and maybe get that. But just kind of paying attention to those issues. I found it's helpful, even if it's just flagging an issue like I think there might be something here, and then to ask.
If it's a class that's really domestic focused, which I think is what your question relates to, if you have independent projects or papers or anything like that, you could do your paper on comparison of the domestic to an international, and then that brings in the international for you. can't always rely on the professor to bring in your area of interest. So if it's something that you're absolutely interested in, talk to the professor about it and say, hey, would you mind if I wrote my paper on this? Or that could be an article that you write for Michigan International Lawyer, some other publication or something like that. So that would be my recommendation on bringing the international into the Mexico classes.
Yep.
I know we talked a little bit about like student memberships to these organizations. I just wondered if there are some of your go-to sources like magazines, websites that kind of flag some of these issues that we're talking about.
Yeah, the IAPP has daily and weekly publications. So once you get your membership, it's called the IAPP tracker or something like that, and that will come out with articles. They're usually pretty short on different issues. Lexology, which I'm not sure if it's free for students or not, also kind of compiles articles from worldwide. And then Law 360 is great. Again, not sure if it's free. But those are the ones that I usually use. And then law firm publications as well. A lot of law firms have publications on data privacy or data security, cybersecurity, all that kind of stuff. And those are usually free.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't know how much they cost, but I know I get IP Law 360 every day, and
Yeah, read it pretty much every day.
I read it every day.
Yep.
INTA, which is the International Trademark Association, if you're a member, they send out bi-weekly newsletters and also, I think, bi-monthly reporters where people actually do write articles on kind of the hot topics in trademark and copyright law. So those are kind of my go-to resources.
In the ABA Deal Points publication for M&A, I think the ABA does a really good job, and their subsection on negotiated transactions is excellent.
I can add to that. I mean, one kind of very broad umbrella organization is the American Society of International Law, and as with the organization that you mentioned, they have a very cheap student membership. You get they have weekly and then sort of maybe biannual publications that come by email, lots of meetings, and a website that covers pretty much everything. Another thing you can do, I think somebody mentioned this, is that particular law firms that have practice groups focusing on particular areas put out newsletters on recent developments, and so I'm not an expert in, but I am interested in international commercial arbitration, and WilmerHale and Freshfields both have email sign-up opportunities, and every time something big happens, they put out a news bulletin on it, and you get it by email. So you can just look through the websites of the bigger international firms and probably sign up for those types of things at no cost. Going once? Well, hope you'll join me in thanking our panelists for a really wonderful presentation, and welcome